So yes, it's an institution that's going to matter, and it's going to be an institution that will, again, they'll work together when they need to. Again, that will also depend on the success of its institutions. If the Khaliji turns into a currency that works, I would bet that the rest of the Emirates will want to join, and eventually Oman, and that will help strengthen the institution. Indeed, Europe kind of looks stronger in part because the euro seemed to have succeeded up until quite recently as a strong global currency.
I was wondering whether NASCAR has discovered the Gulf.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are. I mean, like Formula One, you mean? Yeah.
No, I mean
NASCAR.
NASCAR, the car. Yeah.
They have not, but Chevrolet has, as has Red Bull. Both. Yeah. No. In fact, Red Bull and Chevrolet have sponsored races already in this part of the world, and there is racing. There's a Formula One race done in Bahrain every spring, right? There's a whole thing.
So that little video strip you showed about the racing, is that on public roads, unannounced, or is that in an isolated area?
Anywhere. I mean, to give you, there are other things that are great where people go on major streets and they go gliding. You get an idea. They effectively will hang on the outside of a moving car upright like this. So the car is here and they're moving like that. Yeah, it's really dangerous stuff. But, this is the type of behavior. There's not a far link when you go from this type of behavior to drifting then to terrorism. That there's a direct link to those two.
Thank you.
If I could just add a little story of my own.
Yeah.
That's important here. The last time I was out there, I was talking to a man who rented a car, because you said some of these cars that they...
Almost all, they're all rented.
And abused terribly. Said he was talking to a young man who'd rented a car, was going around a racetrack like this, and suddenly the car just started to slow down. Well, it stopped. He called the rental company to find out what was wrong. They had it monitored by satellite and noticed that it was going around and around
Right.
and around, so they turned off the car.
Yeah, and also, is this type of car racing, can I add, this is not just a Saudi problem. Yeah. Go visit inner city America. I come from Oakland, California. And if you go to Oakland, California, they actually, in the last 10 years, had to build speed bumps and other things. Why? To prevent kids from doing these types of, building not only speed bumps, but roundabouts as a way of preventing kids from doing that. The first time I saw it when I was 12, waiting for my dad to pick me up near an Ace Hardware, and these people were doing it on a major urban street in the U.S. This is, again, if you get bored kids with cars, these type of issues are going to come up. Yes? Yeah. Oh.
So you seem to be making sort of a link between the alienation of youth into these direct, correlations with terrorism. Like, if youth in America are just like youth in the Gulf, what can account for the fact that, you don't see a lot of terrorists coming from Oakland, and what are the outlets?
Well, I mean, it's in terms of terrorism, terrorism isn't the only thing. I mean, the broader point is antisocial behavior, that if people aren't productive, they're going to do things, not just terrorism is potentially one outlying thing. The second thing is, let's be clear, there have been terrorists who are both from lower classes and from elite classes. I mean, Osama bin Laden didn't come from an underprivileged background in any sense of the word. Also, there have been, let's be clear, there have been Americans who have been involved overseas, both from privileged and non-privileged backgrounds in terrorism. The difference is that in American institutions, there are other outlets. In that way, I would make an argument, again, youth centers, other types of things are potential skills that can be integrated into these communities. And I'll say this, the Saudis, to their credit, have worked in bringing in people in through the same type of institutions that we do here. When people, for instance, are released from these programs, just like we have programs here that put people in the drug programs or other things, people are monitored, they're closely controlled, they're closely even monitored up to the point of getting married. The Saudis have been very good at getting terrorists into these organizations, married, giving them cars, giving them jobs as a way of integrating them into the community. And I would probably argue that those types of structures are probably what keep some of those people from being involved in terrorism, although they have other outlets for violence as well. I mean, take a look at the violence rate in the south side of Chicago or in East Oakland this past year. That seems to be a fairly clear example of violence. They don't necessarily have to blow something up in the Middle East or join al-Qaeda to be involved in that type of violence.
Yeah, I have a question. You talked about integration. I mean, who's integrating? Because I don't see, of all these foreign populations that are overwhelming, particularly the Emirates, I don't see a lot of integration. And when you talk about integration, what do you really mean?
Let me tell you a story. Throughout the 1960s, 1970s to 1980s, the Kuwaiti government was awarded by the Catholic Church every single honor that a layperson within the church can receive. Every single honor. And the reason for that is that the Kuwaiti government had made extensive investments, not only in land, but also providing direct money for the Catholic Church to build enormous cathedrals in that part of the world. And indeed, in Kuwait, and there are other parts in the Gulf as well, even in the Emirates. There are churches that function. Look at the amount of foreign schools, for instance, in Saudi Arabia. If there are schools, that means that there are permanent people there for long periods of time, not just individuals, but families. If you talk about, I mean, that's an example of a good example of full integration. There are even Swedish schools in much of this part of the world. Let me finish that thought. Well, look, let's in terms of integration. I mean, let's stop up. Sure, does intermarriage happen? Sure. In terms of various different parts of society, in terms of integration, I'm talking about people who are allowed to be there, who are allowed to be there permanently, whose states allow them to have permanent institutions. In terms of religious learning, cultural and political institutions are all allowed into the ground on a permanent basis. Under the assumption, if you're building people churches, you expect they're going to be there for a significant period of time. In terms of, on a social level, that's a different thing, and that type of issue of intermarriage is a problem that still takes place in almost every society in the world. Interracial marriage, all these other types of issues are still problems in the United States or in Western Europe. All the way to this day, after generations of working together. That would be an example of pure integration. States, for instance, have also offered citizenship. States have allowed state protections. There are human rights commissions in many of these states. The Bahrainis, for instance, have gone a significant distance in that example of building human rights commissions, of extending rights to foreigners, and extending state protection to foreigners. I mean, if you're talking about integration on that social level, that's a different thing. What I mean is integration on the wider social level, social economic level.